20 years. That's how long I gave Vincent DeLuca every ounce of my strength, my patience, my life. I helped him build his dream from a single pizza shop into 7 successful Italian restaurants. And at 55 he tossed me aside like I was nothing. But 3 months later, something I found in an old box in my parents' basement changed everything. Not just my future, but how I saw them, myself, and what real value means. My name is Daniel Harris. For 20 years, I was the operations manager of DeLuca Dining Group, a restaurant chain spread across Ohio. I knew every supplier by name, every secret recipe, every health code shortcut we ever used to survive those crazy nights. I trained every manager, handled every crisis, and when Vincent's own family caused problems, I was the one who quietly fixed them so his reputation stayed clean. I'm not telling this story for sympathy. I'm telling it because sometimes life knocks you flat, and then shows you that someone loved you enough to prepare for that moment decades before you even saw it coming. My father, Harold, worked 40 years at the Ford plant in Cleveland. My mother, Linda, built circuit boards at a local factory. They never had much, but they had discipline. They lived in the same little brick house for 40 years, drove old cars, clipped coupons, and saved every dime they could. I thought I understood their simplicity. I didn't. Behind all that quiet, they were building something for me that would one day save my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the moment everything fell apart. The day I learned what loyalty is worth in today's world. It was the morning I walked into Vincent's office expecting to discuss our next expansion, and instead walked out unemployed, broken, and wondering how a man I called family could look me in the eye and say, "You're too old for this business now." That morning started like any other. I got to our main office early, a cup of black coffee in hand, ready to review last night's numbers. The air smelled faintly of garlic and fresh dough from the test kitchen downstairs, the scent of the world I had helped build. I had no idea that by noon that world would be gone. At 8:05 sharp, Vincent's assistant called. "Mr. DeLuca would like to see you in his office. His son Marco will be there too." My stomach tightened. Marco, 28, polished, all suits and software, had been hanging around the restaurants lately with his tablet and fresh ideas. He'd never closed a kitchen, handled a customer meltdown, or fixed a broken freezer at midnight, but he always spoke like he knew better. When I walked into Vincent's office, the man I'd called my mentor for 2 decades couldn't meet my eyes. His desk, the same one I'd helped him choose at an estate sale years ago, was stacked with reports. Marco sat beside him, scrolling through a spreadsheet, his tie loosened just enough to seem confident. "Danny," Vincent began, forcing a smile, "we've been reviewing our structure, and it's time for a change." I frowned. "A change?" Marco jumped in before his father could speak. "We're restructuring. The industry's moving forward. Digital ordering, influencer campaigns, analytics dashboards. We need younger leadership that understands today's market." "Then teach me," I said calmly. "You know I can learn anything. I built your systems from scratch when we switched to digital inventory." Vincent sighed, his voice low. "You've done more than anyone for me, Danny, but times are different now. You're too old for this pace." Those words hit like ice water. Too old? I'd given him 20 years. Missed family dinners, birthdays, sleep. I looked between them, one man who'd built an empire on loyalty, and another who'd never earned a blister, and realized I was being erased from my own life's work. Marco slid a paper across the desk. "You'll get 40-week severance. We appreciate your service." Service? Like I'd been a waiter, not the backbone of his empire. That was the day I lost my job, and the illusion that loyalty meant something. I left the building in silence, carrying a single cardboard box. 20 years of my life packed into something that barely weighed 10 pounds. A framed photo from our first restaurant opening, an old leather notebook full of handwritten schedules, a mug my daughter had painted for me when she was 6. That was it. The security guard, a kid I'd hired myself 2 years ago, couldn't even meet my eyes. When I stepped into the parking lot, the spring air felt cold against my face. Through the glass, I could see Marco already sitting in my old chair, legs crossed, smiling at something on his phone. My nameplate had already been taken down. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, staring at the building, wondering how a lifetime of loyalty could vanish so quickly. Telling my wife, Joanne, was harder than losing the job. She was folding laundry when I came home in the middle of the day, something I never did. She took one look at my face and the box in my arms, and the clothes slipped from her hands. "He fired you?" she whispered. I nodded. "Both of them did." She sank onto the couch. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The house felt too quiet, too small for the weight of that news. On the wall above her hung a photo from Vincent's 60th birthday. Him with his arm around me, smiling wide, the caption he'd written on the frame, "To my brother in business, my family in life." I couldn't bear to look at it. "We'll figure it out," Joanne finally said, though her voice trembled. "You'll find something else. You always do." But finding something else wasn't easy. The contract I'd signed that morning had a non-compete clause. I couldn't work at any restaurant within 50 miles for 2 years. And restaurants were all I knew. I'd spent decades mastering that world. The next weeks were filled with rejection emails, polite smiles, and phrases like overqualified and looking for someone more in tune with modern trends. Translation: too old. I wasn't just jobless. I was invisible. Days turned into weeks, and every morning started the same way: black coffee, laptop open, hope fading a little more with every unanswered email. I sent out dozens of resumes, each one crafted with care, each one ignored or politely declined. "We've decided to move forward with another candidate. Your experience is impressive, but not a fit for our direction." Those were the nice ones. One afternoon, a hiring manager from a logistics company actually told me the truth. "Look, Daniel," he said over the phone, his tone almost apologetic, "you've got great credentials, but my boss doesn't hire anyone over 50. Says they can't keep up with the company culture." When he hung up, I sat staring at the wall for a long time, hearing those words on repeat. Couldn't keep up. Funny, I'd spent decades keeping entire restaurants alive with duct tape and sleepless nights, but suddenly I was outdated. Our savings started shrinking faster than I'd feared. Mitchell, our son, called from college, excited about a summer internship that required him to pay for housing in Chicago. $3,000 we didn't have. Our daughter, Renee, needed new soccer cleats and tournament fees. The car started making a noise I couldn't afford to fix, and the water heater decided to die right on schedule. I stopped sleeping. Joanne tried to stay strong, but I caught her crying in the bathroom more than once. She kept saying, "We'll be fine," but her eyes gave her away. The walls of our small house started feeling tighter, the silence heavier. Then one sleepless morning, while rummaging through the old filing cabinet in our basement, I found a folder labeled in my mother's neat handwriting, "Daniel, Savings." Inside was a yellowed envelope, worn soft at the edges. Written on it were the words First Federal Bank, 1985. For a second I almost laughed. I remembered that account. My very first, opened when I was 15 after earning $20 from my summer job at Henderson's Hardware. My grandfather had insisted, "Every man needs his own money, Danny. Don't touch it unless it's a real emergency." At that moment I didn't know it yet, but that envelope, that tiny forgotten account, was about to change everything. The next morning, I drove to the bank with that old yellow envelope sitting on the passenger seat beside me. It felt almost silly, a 40-year-old passbook with my teenage signature scrawled across it. Still, desperate people chase even the smallest chance. Maybe there'd be a few $100s in it, enough to buy groceries or fix the heater. The old First Federal Bank where I'd opened it was gone, replaced by a sleek glass building with the name Midwest National shining in silver letters. I stood in line clutching the passbook like an artifact. When my turn came, the young teller with perfect nails looked at it and laughed softly. "Wow, I've never seen one of these outside training photos." "I know," I said, embarrassed. "It's probably nothing." She waved over her manager, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes named Patricia. She studied the account number, frowning thoughtfully. "This is really old, Mr. Harris. But it's still valid. Let's check our legacy system." She led me to her small office and typed the number into a computer that looked older than I was. The screen glowed with green text. For a moment, everything was silent, except for the soft hum of the printer. Then she stopped typing, stared at the screen, and took off her glasses. "This is unusual," she said slowly. My heart sank. "It's closed, isn't it?" She shook her head. "No, it's active. But Mr. Harris, this account has an automatic investment plan attached to it." "What? That's impossible. I only deposited $20 when I was 15. Patricia turned the screen toward me. "Your father added $5 every month for 25 years. After he passed, your mother continued, $10 a month until 2015. I blinked. "They never told me." She smiled gently. "That's not all. Those deposits bought fractional shares of Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company, every single month for 40 years. I didn't understand what that meant yet. Not until she printed the balance sheet and slid it toward me. The number on that paper made my breath catch in my throat. I stared at the paper, blinking hard, thinking maybe I was misreading it. But no, those numbers were real. $3,742,816.34. My heart thudded in my chest. There's got to be a mistake, I said, my voice shaking. My parents were factory workers. They never had that kind of money. Patricia leaned forward. I've checked 3 times. The Social Security numbers match. Every deposit came from them. They bought tiny pieces of Berkshire Hathaway stock, $5 and $10 at a time, since 1985. They never withdrew a penny. I couldn't speak. For a long moment, the only sound was the printer humming quietly beside us. Then Patricia added, there's also a sealed letter in our vault attached to this account. The instructions say to give it to you when you access it. A few minutes later, she came back holding an old yellow envelope, the paper soft and faded. My name was written on it in my mother's careful cursive. For Danny, only when you need it most. I opened it slowly. Inside was a folded letter dated June 15, 1985, written in her gentle handwriting. Dear Danny, if you're reading this, life has knocked you down. We set this up for that day. Every month we'll add a little, not for a car, not for a vacation, but for when you truly need it. Your father's cousin told us about a man named Warren Buffett who believes in patience, that good things grow slowly. We don't know much about stocks, but we know about hard work and time. Remember, your worth doesn't come from any boss or company. It comes from who you are. You are our best investment. Love, Mom. At the bottom was a note in my father's shaky handwriting, added years later. Still adding money, son. Buffett was right about patience. You're doing great, but if things ever fall apart, know that we always believed in you. Love, Dad. By the time I finished reading, tears blurred the ink. I sat there in Patricia's office, holding that letter, my throat tight, my hands trembling. It felt like my parents were right there beside me, whispering across the years. 2 people who had never owned a credit card, who patched old clothes and made soup stretch for 3 nights, had somehow built a safety net big enough to catch me decades later. Patricia gave me a moment before speaking again. Mr. Harris, your parents didn't just invest money. They invested faith, every single month, through recessions, through layoffs, through everything. She smiled softly. Most people chase quick wins. Your parents planted something slow and steady. And it grew beautifully. Her words barely registered. My whole body felt weightless, like I was floating somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. They could have used this money, I murmured. They could have lived easier. Maybe they did, Patricia said. Just not for themselves. When I walked out of the bank that afternoon, the sky looked different, brighter somehow. I sat in my car staring at the letter again, reading it over and over. You are our best investment. My mother's words cut through every failure, every rejection, every cruel reminder that I was too old. I drove home in silence, my mind racing through memories, my dad coming home from the plant covered in grease but still smiling, my mom clipping coupons at the kitchen table with her tea. I remembered how they never complained, how they always said, hard times pass, good habits stay. I hadn't understood what that meant until now. When I handed Joanne the letter that evening, she read it once, then again, and then sank to her knees, crying into her hands. They saved you, she whispered. They really saved us. Our kids, Mitchell and Renee, came running in, confused at first, until we explained. They sat around the table reading the letter, asking questions, laughing, crying. We stayed there for hours, 4 people in a small kitchen, realizing that love can grow interest too. That sometimes the biggest inheritance isn't money at all. It's the quiet belief that your worth never expires. The next few days felt like living inside a dream I hadn't earned. Every time I looked at the letter, my chest tightened with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. Joanne kept it on the kitchen counter like a sacred relic, reading it over morning coffee, tracing my mother's handwriting with her fingertips. She knew, Danny, she whispered one morning. She knew you'd need this one day. The truth was, the money was only half the miracle. What really shook me was how well my parents had understood me, how they'd seen a storm I couldn't imagine 40 years before it arrived. While I'd spent my life proving my worth to another man, they had quietly built a fund that proved I'd always had it. That realization changed something inside me. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. The panic that had been gnawing at my chest finally started to fade. Instead of wondering who would hire me, I began wondering what I could build. One evening, Mitchell suggested something that stuck with me. Dad, you know restaurants better than anyone. Why not open your own? At first I laughed. With what money? With what courage? But Joanne looked up from the sink and said softly, with your parents' faith. Those words stayed with me all night. By morning, the idea didn't feel impossible anymore. Not fancy, not flashy, just something honest, something mine. A place where people like me, People told they were too old or too slow or too ordinary, could belong again. I went back to that same bank, opened a new account and transferred a portion of the investment into startup capital. I could almost hear my dad's voice saying, "Use it wisely, son. Make it grow." And that's exactly what I intended to do. I started small, no grand business plan, no investors, no glossy pitch deck. Just a rented storefront in Lakewood, the kind of neighborhood that still smelled like Sunday dinners and second chances. The space had good bones but needed love, cracked tiles, faded walls, a leaky faucet that sang at midnight. But I saw potential in every flaw, the same way my parents must have seen potential in me when they were scraping together $5 bills. I spent weeks cleaning, painting, and fixing things myself. Joanne helped pick the colors, warm cream and deep green, comforting but strong. Mitchell came home on weekends to hang lights and build shelves. Renee painted a small sign that would hang by the door, Eugene and Linda's. My parents' names. The day that sign went up, I stood on the sidewalk staring at it for a long time. The world rushed by, cars honking, people laughing, but in that moment, everything went still. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was a thank you letter carved in wood. My first hire was Martha, a woman in her 60s who'd been let go from her old job because the kitchen needed younger hands. She cried when I told her she didn't need to prove anything to me. Then came Hector, 58, who could fix anything but had been replaced by a kid who understood new equipment better. And Louise, 67, who remembered every customer's name but had been told she was too slow for the new pace. They weren't liabilities. They were treasures, patient, reliable, steady. Together we built something that felt real again. We opened quietly, no ads, no influencer reviews, just a chalkboard sign that said, "Good food, good people. Welcome home." And they came. First, a few curious neighbors. Then families. Then regulars. People brought friends and those friends brought more. Within months, our little restaurant buzzed with laughter and stories. Every Friday night, I'd stand near the kitchen and watch it all, the teamwork, the warmth, the life, and think, "Mom, Dad, you were right. Some things really do grow better with time." By the third month, Eugene and Linda's was more alive than I'd ever dreamed. The line outside started forming before we even flipped the sign to open. Families came early, couples lingered late, and laughter rolled through the dining room like music. The smell of simmering sauce and baked bread filled every corner, the kind of scent that felt like home to anyone who walked in. I worked side by side with my team every day. Martha ran the kitchen like a symphony conductor, her hands moving with quiet authority. Hector made sure every machine worked perfectly, always humming old songs as he tightened bolts or adjusted knobs. Louise floated between tables, remembering every face, every name, every birthday. When she brought out a surprise slice of cake for someone, you could see their whole week melt away. We didn't have fancy decor or online campaigns. We had warmth, consistency, and people who cared. That was our secret recipe. Word spread the old-fashioned way, one satisfied customer at a time. Soon, local bloggers showed up, writing about the restaurant run by wisdom, calling it a place where experience cooks better than trends. Every night after closing, I'd wipe down the counters and glance at the framed photo of my parents by the entrance. Dad in his work overalls, Mom smiling in her Sunday dress. I'd whisper, "We did it," before turning off the lights. One night as I was locking up, a sleek black car pulled up outside. A man stepped out, sharp suit, shiny shoes, face I knew too well. Marco DeLuca. He smiled awkwardly as he walked toward me. "Dad sent me," he said over the noise of the street. "He wants to talk. He's thinking maybe you'd come back. Help rebuild." For a second, I just stared at him, watching the glow of my restaurant reflect in his car window. Behind me, I could still hear faint laughter from the staff cleaning up. "Tell your father I'm too old for his business," I said, unlocking the door again. "But I'm exactly the right age for mine." Marco didn't have a response. He just stood there, speechless as I walked back inside, home. Marco lingered outside for a moment, his eyes flicking from the glowing sign above the door to the crowd still finishing desserts inside. Through the window, I could see Martha laughing with a young couple, Hector shaking hands with a regular, and Louise wrapping leftovers for a family that promised to come back next week. It was everything his father's empire used to be, before it traded heart for hashtags. He cleared his throat. "Dad says he's willing to discuss terms," he offered, voice softening. "He knows he made a mistake." I studied him, his polished shoes, his tailored suit, his restless eyes darting toward his phone. "A mistake?" I asked quietly. "Or just bad timing?" Marco hesitated. "We've lost 3 locations," he admitted. The rest are hanging by a thread. People say your place reminds them of the old DeLucas, the way it used to feel. There was the truth. The empire had cracked, and now the son of the man who'd fired me stood on my doorstep asking for help. I smiled, not out of spite but peace. Marco, what your father built was impressive. But what I'm building is meaningful. There's a difference. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slightly, almost respectfully, before turning to leave. As his car disappeared into the night, I stood there under the sign, Eugene and Linda's, glowing softly in the dark, and felt something I hadn't felt in years, pride without permission. The following week, business doubled again. People didn't just come for food, they came for belonging. Martha started teaching cooking classes on Sundays. Hector trained a teenage dishwasher on maintenance, calling him my apprentice. Louise organized a community dinner for seniors who ate alone. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore, it was a family, one I didn't have to beg to belong to. And every night, when I locked up and saw that framed photo by the door, I whispered the same words my father once told me before his night shifts: work hard, stay kind, and never forget your worth. Months passed, and our little restaurant became something of a legend in Lakewood. People said there was magic in the food, but I knew better. It wasn't magic, it was memory. Every recipe Martha made carried years of experience. Every table Hector repaired held the mark of his careful hands. Every smile Louise gave reminded people that kindness still had a place in the world. We didn't chase trends, we chased moments. Families came for birthdays, couples came for anniversaries, and strangers came just to feel part of something real. One local paper ran a headline that said, Eugene and Linda's, where time slows down and the food feels like love. I clipped it and pinned it to the corkboard by the kitchen door. Sometimes I'd step outside during a busy night and look through the window at the glow inside, the clinking plates, the laughter, the warmth, and I'd think of the day I walked out of Vincent's office with nothing but a cardboard box and a broken heart. I didn't know it then, but that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Word eventually reached me that Vincent had retired and moved to Florida. His once bustling empire had shrunk to a single struggling restaurant, now run by his nephew. It hurt less than I thought it would. The anger had faded, replaced by something quieter: gratitude. Because if he hadn't thrown me out, I never would have found my own place to stand. One afternoon, a young reporter came by to interview me for a local feature. She asked, Mr. Harris, what's your secret? How did you rebuild your life from nothing? I smiled, thinking of the yellowed letter tucked safely in my office drawer. Patience, I said. And the right kind of investment. She tilted her head. You mean money? I shook my head. No. I mean people. Because that's what my parents had taught me without ever saying it. Invest in what grows quietly, steadily, and with love. And if you do, one day it grows into something worth more than you could ever measure. A year later, Eugene and Linda celebrated its first anniversary. We didn't throw a big event. No banners, no advertisements. Just a small gathering with our regular customers, staff, and family. Joanne baked a cake herself, the kind her mother used to make on Sundays, and we set it out in the middle of the restaurant once the dinner rush ended. Martha stood by my side, her apron dusted with flour, eyes gleaming with quiet pride. You did it, Danny, she said softly. You built something that feels like home. I smiled. We did it, Martha. You, Hector, Louise, all of us. The truth was, the success wasn't mine alone. Every face in that room had carried this place forward. One smile, one meal, one late night at a time. I looked around at the crowded tables, the laughter echoing through the warm yellow light, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. After closing, when the last of the guests had gone home, I sat alone at the counter with a glass of wine. The night outside was quiet, the neon sign humming faintly in the window. I reached into my pocket and unfolded my mother's letter, the one I'd read 100 times but still felt new each time. You are our best investment. Those words still hit me like the first day. They weren't talking about money, not really. They were talking about belief. About planting something good and letting time do its work. I realized then that this restaurant wasn't just a business. It was proof that what my parents had started decades ago was still growing, through every person who walked through our doors, through every plate of food served with care. Before locking up, I flipped the closed sign and whispered toward their photo on the wall. We made it, Mom. We made it, Dad. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely certain I hadn't just survived being thrown away. I'd become exactly who they always knew I could be. The following winter, something happened that reminded me just how far I'd come. A man came into the restaurant alone on a quiet Tuesday evening. He was older, his gray hair neatly combed, his suit too nice for our little place. I didn't recognize him at first, not until he looked up from the menu and smiled faintly. "Danny," he said. "It's been a long time." It was Vincent DeLuca. The man who'd once called me family, then cut me loose like a bad investment. For a moment I didn't know what to say. I half expected anger to rise in me, but it didn't. Just calm. He looked around, taking in the warm light, the laughter, the clinking dishes. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "You did what I couldn't." I poured him a glass of water and sat across from him. "You could've," I replied. "You just stopped seeing people as the main ingredient." He gave a small, tired laugh. "Maybe so. Rocco's running what's left, but the spark's gone. I don't know how to get it back." For a while we just sat there, two old men surrounded by the life we'd once dreamed of building together. Finally he reached into his coat pocket and took out a photo, the same one from our first restaurant opening, both of us younger, faces covered in flour, laughing like fools. He slid it across the table. "I kept this," he said. "Even when I lost everything." I looked at that picture for a long time. "You didn't lose everything, Vinny. You just forgot what mattered." He nodded slowly. "Looks like you remembered." Then he stood, shook my hand, and left without another word. When the door closed behind him, I felt something lift off my chest. Not revenge, not triumph. Just release. I walked to the front window and looked out at the snow falling under the streetlight. The world was quiet, peaceful. Somewhere out there, my parents' lesson was still echoing. Patience, kindness, and faith, the only investments that never fail. Years have passed since that snowy night, but every morning when I unlock the doors to Eugene and Linda's, it still feels new. The light through the front windows paints the same golden stripes across the counter, the smell of fresh bread fills the air, and the picture of my parents greets me from its place by the entrance. Sometimes I stop there before anything begins, resting my hand on the frame and whispering a quiet thank you. The money they left is still invested, still growing, but I hardly think about the number anymore. What matters is what it built. A life of purpose, of peace, of people who remind me that worth never fades with age. We've expanded a little, bought the space next door for a small bakery that Martha runs now. Hector's training his nephew in maintenance, passing down his steady hands. Louise retired last spring, but she still visits every Thursday night for meatballs and stories. Customers come from all over now. Some say they heard about the restaurant online, others just stumbled in by chance. But when they sit down, I see the same thing in their faces: comfort, belonging, a memory of something that feels almost forgotten in this fast world. Sometimes younger folks ask me how I turned my life around after being thrown away. I always smile and tell them the truth. I wasn't thrown away, I say. I was replanted. Because that's what my parents did for me. They planted something small, $5 a month, a little faith, a lot of love, and gave it time to bloom. Now every meal we serve carries a piece of that belief. Every guest who leaves smiling carries it forward. And every night as I lock up and the lights fade, I know that the greatest wealth my parents gave me wasn't money. It was the proof that patience, kindness, and love, when tended to, will always grow into something extraordinary.